Welcome back. I'm Dianne Legro, and I'm talking with Sandy Costa, who's written tips from his book, Humanity at Work, tips on helping us to practice. And he's doing a wonderful job of helping us to practically and tactically begin to practice how to boil down some of the confusion so that we have tools, very simple, practical tools to move forward to bring more humanity, more understanding, more consciousness to our daily work. Today, we're going to talk with Sandy about emotional intelligence, the need for that, what it is about. Good morning, Sandy.
Good morning.
Good morning. Now, Sandy, there are some listeners. They are leaders, they are managers, they're professionals, they want to develop their people perhaps, but they're also keeping their eye on having a competitive advantage for their company.
Sure.
So how is this going to help people listening who still might be thinking that it's an either-or, that their leadership style needs to be either bottom-line oriented or helping their people develop and having a good workforce? There's been a lot written about it. Some people still on the line. So tell us what you're talking about the value and the need and the productivity piece of emotional intelligence in the workplace.
Well, I think it's pretty simple, Diane. I mean, unless things have changed, I've never seen a company that wasn't run by people. And
right.
Particularly service-based organizations, there is a distinction that's interesting there. If you have a product-based company and you're having some problems in the structure of the organization or some interpersonal problems or intra-department problems, as long as the product's going out the door, to some extent you can get by and have the luxury of some period of time, not forever, but some period of time to solve those problems. But in a service-based company, for example, where every dollar that's made is a function of what people do, those types of companies are exquisitely sensitive on the bottom line to making sure that you have people that can get on with each other, you have leaders who understand how to deal with people, because if they don't, the work product that is the function of your revenues will diminish. It's just that simple. And when we talk about emotional intelligence, I know it sounds like a soft subject, but it really isn't. There are hard facts here. And I think there's some that we all recognize but don't focus on sometimes. And emotional intelligence is really that set of competencies that demonstrate an individual's ability to recognize his or her own behavioral moods and impulses and to manage these as best they can. And I think the thing that's important about it is, and it's different than personality, of course. Personality is more kind of like our behavioral patterns. And you can be a person whose personality might not shine, but you might have a great deal of emotional intelligence, and it can be just the opposite as well. But I think the thing that emotional intelligence teaches us is not only how to deal with ourselves, but how to deal with other people. And I prefer the term, actually, emotional competence, because emotional competence speaks to understanding how to deal with other people. And if there's one thing that we have to recognize on a daily basis, it's that it would be irrational to believe that people will act rationally and unemotionally. I suppose that's what caused Mark Twain to write that the difference between fact and fiction is that fiction has to be rational. It has to make sense, because he recognizes, we all do, that what happens in our daily lives when you're dealing with people is often highly irrational and very emotional. And so, for example, in understanding the complexities of people, if I had to sit down with someone and have a really difficult discussion, I would often role play what I was going to say to that person and how I thought they would accept what I was going to say. And the reason was I didn't want them to become emotional. I didn't want them to become angry, because one of the things I talk about in my books is that you can never intellectualize your emotions. And by that I mean, if your emotions and your intellect are having a battle, the emotional win every time. We've all had circumstances where we were angry and we say, I can get over this, I can get back to what I'm doing. But you can't. Emotions essentially have to run their course. And Daniel Goleman, in his landmark book on emotional intelligence, talks a lot about emotional intelligence, but about this specific issue. And what he tells us, for example, is that we have a rational brain and an emotional brain. And the rational brain is tentative. And the reason it's tentative is because it's always looking for more facts on which to make decisions. But the emotional brain deals in black and white. And what happens is, if we're emotional, if we get really angry, for example, what will occur is the emotional brain will kidnap the rational brain and force it to come up with reasons why it's right. And that's why when we're really angry, there's this illusion of clarity, that we're absolutely certain that we're right, but of course we're not. And the teaching you take away from that is, first of all, if you're really angry, don't hit that send button. Take whatever memo you had written, whatever note you would have on the computer, and put it at the bottom of the page and let it sit there. And you'd be fascinated. I think we've all done this, at least if you haven't sent the note. You'll pull it up and you'll start modifying it, and before you know it, you've kind of taken the edge off of it. And you do this long enough, and you give your emotions a chance to subside, and you'll find that you can kind of make a more rational sense of what you're trying to do at that point. And so we shouldn't do things when we're angry, and we should try not to really interact with other people if they're angry. We need to kind of step back from that as much as we can and let people cool off. And so I think when we talk about these types of things, emotional competence and all, they really go to the gears of the organization, which are the people. And unless we have an ability to understand ourselves, which includes a high degree of self-awareness, and we ought to talk about that separately at some point, and understand other people and the complexities of other people, it really is difficult to understand all of the nuances and the complexities of having people work together or work for you.
Well, I think that you hit it right at the top. How could we live without it, really? And like you said, you might get by for a short amount of time in a product-based company or service-based company, but really, you're talking about understanding yourself, that self-awareness. I'd love to talk more about that with you.
Be delighted.
Your emotional competence piece, so valuable in every way to every organization. And I love this is a metaphor. I wrote down, don't hit the send button, a perfect metaphor.
Well, it's an interesting story. I've read quite a lot on Abraham Lincoln because I've just admired so much of what he had done in his life. And they tell an interesting story after the Battle of Gettysburg, which I'm sure most of our listeners are aware of, which was one of the decisive battles of the Civil War. Lincoln had learned that his general in charge, General Meade, did not pursue Lee's army. And Lincoln was infuriated. He had thought that if Meade had pursued Lee after that battle, that he could have pretty much ended the war at that point because Lee's army had been pretty well decimated. And he wrote a letter to Meade that day. He was just furious, and the letter was really harsh. He pretty much accused the man of cowardness. And 3 or 4 days later, Lincoln found out that the reason Meade hadn't chased after Lee's army is because virtually all of his senior officers had been killed at the Battle of Gettysburg, that Meade had slept 3 or 4 hours in 5 days, and that his army was also decimated. When Lincoln died, they found that letter in his desk. He had the wisdom not to send it. I'm sure he felt a lot better after writing it, but he had the wisdom not to send it. And I think those are the types of lessons we take away from these things.
Yes. Don't hit the send button. Beautifully said. Sandy, thank you so much. All of these tips are really helping companies and individuals with critical success factors. And the ones that we dismiss, used to be just thought of as the soft information. I think it's going to become the hard information in the future.
Absolutely.
And you're leading the way. Thank you so much. We can get Humanity at Work, your book, and learn more. And your stories and your context and your perceptions, which are so valuable, shining a light on these topics for us. We can find that at Amazon. We can find that at your website, santocosta.com. It's on Kindle. And thank you for writing it. We'll talk to you again.
Thank you, Diane.